CloudFox and CloudFoxable, a powerful duo for mastering the art of identifying and exploiting AWS attack paths. As always, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Skyhawk. Skyhawk Security has built the first cloud breach prevention platform, monitoring threats, correlating them into an attack storyline, and offering remediation recommendations and automation, enabling our customers to take action before a full-blown breach occurs. Learn more at skyhawk.security. We'll be taking questions after the talk. Please welcome our speaker. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to my talk about CloudFox and CloudFoxable. So my name is Seth Art, and I'm a principal consultant at Bishop Fox, where I'm the cloud penetration testing lead. As the t-shirt says, I love open source software, and while at Bishop Fox, I've had the opportunity to work on a couple of open source projects, including BadPods, I Am Vulnerable, and CloudFox. Today, I'm going to talk about CloudFox, a tool that we open sourced in September of 2022. I'm going to talk about CloudFoxable, something that we open sourced and are going to release this morning. I'm going to demo one of the CloudFoxable challenges, and I'm going to talk about my future plans for both CloudFox and CloudFoxable. So I'm not exactly sure what link has to do with cloud pen testing, but I really wanted to use that slide. So before I talk about any of that, I wanted to kind of define what I view as cloud pen testing. So of course, you're always going to look for attack paths from the outside in, but I think it's much, those are fewer and far between. So I think it's a mistake if you don't also perform white box, assume breach, objective-based penetration testing. And that's where CloudFox and CloudFoxable live, teaching that art. So CloudFox is a tool that we created to help with this, right? To help with the enumeration process of cloud pen testing and also determining impact, which is like the second major step of pen testing. I like to say that it's an attack tool, but it doesn't attack. So very specifically, it doesn't do any auto exploitation at all. And also, it doesn't give you any findings, so it's not a CSPM tool. It kind of lives in the middle of the two of those areas. It's there to give you situational awareness, to help you find threads to pull on, so that you can maybe turn those threads into impactful findings. One of the other things that I really like about CloudFox is that it gives you the steps you might need to do future tasks. And this is something I loved from AWS PX. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that tool. It's a Priv-esque graphing tool. And instead of doing it for you, it kind of gives you the commands. And I think that's a better way to teach penetration testers how to kind of learn one thing and then expand that and kind of move it forward and not be reliant on a tool. So this is just one of the 30 AWS CloudFox commands. There's also 4 Azure commands. The Azure functionality is certainly much more basic, but with AWS, we use CloudFox on every one of our AWS penetration tests at Bishop Fox. So this one is the environment variables command. So what this does is it looks at a bunch of AWS services that are using environment variables. Some of these environment variables are going to be benign, and some of them might be very interesting to a penetration tester. So here it's looking at App Runner, ECS, Lambda, Lightsail, SageMaker, etc. And you see that there is a Lambda function with RDS credentials in it, right? So this is not where your job ends as a penetration tester, though, right? This is interesting, but the context of where this Lambda exists is much more interesting, right? If this Lambda exists in the organizational management account, and only 3 people that are like system admin level access have access to that account, then there's not much impact, right? Those people already have access to these secrets, these RDS creds. Now, if this Lambda function is in your production account, and maybe hundreds of developers have read-only access to the production account and nothing more, and it would be a break of that security boundary if they did have write access, then this could be a much bigger deal. And so to teach, that's kind of the art, and that's what I spend a lot of time teaching when I teach about cloud pen testing. And so to help learn that enumeration process and also the determining impact process, I created CloudFoxable. So CloudFoxable is another intentionally vulnerable environment, and it draws inspiration from 2 main projects, specifically Flaws and Flaws 2 and CloudGoat. So what I really love about Flaws and Flaws 2 are the hint-based system, and then it's really easy to access. It's hosted. You can kind of walk through and use as many hints as you want to kind of iteratively learn the process, and kind of you walk away, even if you're not familiar with those challenges or those services, you walk away learning new stuff. What I really like about CloudFox is that, CloudGoat, is that you deploy it into your own environment, and so you can have more complex or more impactful findings like remote code execution type attack paths. But when you're deploying it into your own environment, there's costs associated with that, right? Unless you're just created a new account and you're working with the free tier. So what I really love about CloudGoat is the modular approach. You can enable one scenario, learn that challenge, and then disable it when you're done. So I built that into CloudFoxable as well. So what's kind of unique about CloudFoxable is that I combine those two approaches. I'm using CTFD, which is an open source capture the flag software that's used for a lot of hacker conferences for point-in-time CTFs. But I'm using it, we're going to host it permanently at cloudfoxable.bishopfox.com. So you are deploying the environment into your own account just like you are with CloudGoat, but the gamification, the flags, the hints, the scoreboard is all hosted for you. There's 18 challenges now, and so this is kind of another differentiator. So there are some easy challenges in CloudGoat, but I went like even easier. So some of the first challenges in CloudFoxable are something as simple as you figure out what the starting user, what permissions they have, and they just have permission to access a flag. Like look at the permissions that you have, access the flag. The next challenge is, okay, you can assume a role that can then access the flag. And I walk all the way through that to CloudGoat type complexity. So with that, I'm going to kind of touch on one of the challenges that is in line with this conference theme of blurring the lines of cloud security and cloud computing. We're going to go from outside, somebody with no access to the AWS environment, and demonstrate how they can gain access to a role in the environment and access the flag. I will say that when we've seen this on penetration tests, this usually leads to administrative access, not just a single permission that gets you the flag, but that's kind of the nature of a CTF. So what we're looking at here is the CloudFoxable login page. And so I've already created an account. We're going to open up the challenges. So the first challenge just walks you through installing the environment in your own AWS account. Please don't use a production account. I've grouped the categories into kind of your assumed breach type categories, and then here's a couple for the blurred lines of this conference. So this is the only challenge where you actually first have to create a GitHub repo for the purpose of this challenge, and then what you do is you edit the Terraform TFRs file, you enable the Trust Me challenge, you specify the repo that you just created for this challenge, and then you can do a Terraform apply. So that's another difference that, you only have to do a Terraform apply to enable stuff and disable stuff. So there is a role that trusts the repo that we just created in CloudFoxable. Find the role and exploit the trust to access the flag. And I know this is going to be really hard to see from the back, but maybe that's good because I'm spoiling one of the challenges. So this is the repository that I created for this challenge. And I'm going to copy that repository name and enter it, and we're going to enter it into the terraform.tfrs file. And so this is where you configure all the CloudFoxable parameters. So what profile you're going to use to deploy CloudFoxable. If you want to use a non-default region. And this is where you would enable and disable all the challenges. So the challenges that have no cost are enabled by default. And then the ones that require configuration like this one or that have cost have to be enabled manually. And so I'm just enabled it. I've added the repository that we just created. And we're going to do a Terraform apply. And so one of the neat things that I like about this output is that every time you do a Terraform apply, it'll tell you which challenges are enabled and a rough estimate of the monthly cost. So I don't think you're going to be using a challenge for a month, but just to kind of level set. So this challenge, when we say yes, is going to deploy 11 resources. To the account. Okay, so now we've deployed the challenge, so we're ready to start. So the first thing we want to do is find the role that trusts the repository, right? And the CloudFox role trust command was actually the first command we created in CloudFox. And so what this does is it looks at the trust policy of every role and splits it up into 3 categories, and one role could be in multiple categories. So the first table is roles that trust other principals to assume them. The second category is roles that trust services, so things that you can use with IAM pass role. And the third category is roles that trust third parties using SAML or OIDC. And so what we can see, or not see, is the T. Rodman role here trusts GitHub, and specifically it trusts the repo CloudFoxable, trust me demo : star. And that : star is going to be important. That's part of the vulnerability and part of the fix that we'll talk about later. And if you run pmapper ahead of CloudFox, it'll tell you whether the role is an admin or can privest to admin. Okay, so now we know the role, and so what's the next logical step? What permissions does this role have, right? We do this hundreds of times on a penetration test, every time we access a new resource. So you can do the permissions command on all principles, but we're going to specify what does T. Rodman have. T. Rodman, like I said, it's a CTF. T. Rodman has SSM get parameter for any parameter that is prefixed with trust dash. Okay, so now you can go into the AWS console, or you can use the CLI command, but there's also a CloudFox command called secrets, which will list all of the secrets in Secrets Manager and SSM parameters. And so you can see that there are 4 SSM parameters that meet the prefix qualification, so we can access any of those if we have access to the T. Rodman role. And so this is the part where I talked about what I liked about AWS PX. For every secret in that table, there's a loot file that will give you the command to access that secret. So it'll just pre-populate the region for you, pre-populate all the parameters you need. And so at this point, we have everything we need to access the secret if we can get access to the T. Rodman role. All right, so here is where we're going to create a malicious GitHub action. And this GitHub action is called getFlag. And you can't see it, which again it might be good, is that this action is going to run on pushes to the main branch. So when there's a push to the main branch, including this push we're going to push to main, we are going to assume the T. Rodman role and access the flag using the AWS CLI. Now, while this is running, I'm just committing it to main. While this is running, you might be thinking, well, I have branch protections in place. I have required reviews in place. This isn't going to work. And you are correct. That would prevent this action from running. And that's where I thought, end of story. But after this runs, I'll show you another example that will work even if you have branch protections and required reviews. And so for many penetration testers, this might be the first time they're working with GitHub Actions, even though for many of you it's very familiar. So here we go. We have accessed the flag for this challenge. So as far as CloudFoxable is concerned, we're done. We've completed the challenge. But let's dig a little deeper. So let's figure out if we can get access to that flag even if branch protections or required reviews are in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a second action. And this one is called getFlag unmerged. And so the only difference here is that the on stanza is going to occur on pull requests to the main branch. So everything else is the same. And so I was under the impression that the action had to be committed to main to execute, but that is incorrect. So this action will execute from the branch that I just created as soon as I click that pull request button. And because of that : star, the way the role trust was created, we can still access that role. And so that's what we're going to see here. And so as soon as we see this, we're going to talk about how to fix that. So there we go. There's the challenge flag again. So the solution for this is to use GitHub environments with deployment branches. So what this does, you have to make this change in 2 places. So on the GitHub side, you have to create an environment, and there is one caveat here. You can create an environment on a public repo and a private repo, but only if you're in one of the paid tiers for GitHub. So GitHub Enterprise, GitHub Pro, things like that. So there's a little gap there. So you create the environment. So we're going to create an environment called production, and we're going to map the main branch to this production environment on the GitHub side. And on the AWS side, on the trust policy, we're now going to change the trust from trust me demo : to trust me demo : environment, the word environment, and then whatever the name of your environment that you just created. And when you do that, so if we execute the PR, the PR that we created as is, we'll get this error. We're not authorized to perform STS assume role with web identity. That's because the role now needs the claim environment production, and it doesn't have that, right? We're executing without the environment production. Now, if the attacker was trying to be sneaky and they added in the GitHub action itself, they added environment : production, then what would happen was they would get this error that they were rejected. So the error is sethsec bf patch 1 is not allowed to deploy to production environment because of the protection rules. So the deployment was rejected. So these mechanisms now, this doesn't preclude branch protections and required reviews. You still need that in place. But if you are worried about people with write access assuming your roles with OIDC, you want to have environments and deployment protection rules in place as well. These two sites do a much better job of explaining this than I do. The first one is an excellent blog. The second one is official GitHub documentation. But yeah, everything you need to know. Environments are just one way. You could also tie to specific branches, things like that. So there are a lot of different ways you can do this. But we often see : in our pen tests on trusted OIDC roles. Okay, so I'm running out of time here, so the last two challenges that I'm just going to touch about briefly. We talked about outside in. Now we're going to go from inside out. So AWS, sometimes we'll find things like Kubernetes tokens, GitHub personal access tokens. So this is a challenge that walks the user through getting a GitHub PAT, using it to gain access to a flag in a private repository. And then this has been talked about in other talks here, but there are SNS topics, SQS right? Many things that you've seen in this conference that you can test yourself in CloudFoxable, exploiting those and getting flags. This one gets RCE on a Lambda. It's quite fun. There's also an SQS one as well. So with that, what's next for CloudFox and CloudFoxable? Multi-account support. So I want to have multi-account challenges in CloudFoxable, and I really want to add multi-account support for CloudFox. Right now it runs individually on each account, but I would love to have it kind of do some of that cross-account attack path stuff for us. And with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy CloudFoxable.
Awesome talk, and if there's a trophy for best use of CFP topic or CFP topic blurred lines, I think good for you. Thank you. Questions? Cool.
Hi. First, thank you for making this. This is awesome for pen testers like me. I wanted to ask about how this is being maintained, both the tools CloudFox and CloudFoxable. Is that something that obviously, there's other tools that have been left or unmaintained for some periods of time. Is there plans for eventualities like that for the maintenance of these tools?
Yeah, both of these are maintained by me and some teammates at PitcherFox. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have big plans for both of these in the future. They're actively maintained. The nice thing about a conference talk is that you can publicize it. The bad thing is that I was preparing my presentation. I have all these other challenges that I want to add to CloudFoxable, so it's going to grow over time. Thank you.
With regard to CloudFox, you said you've been using it in a number of engagements at this point. What would you say are some of the most successful commands you've seen bear fruit? And then, what are some of the noisiest commands that you're kind of sketched out to run, maybe because it may alert anybody who's watching?
Yeah, I love that question. So in my view, cloud penetration testing shouldn't be kind of like trying to evade detection. I think if you're at the maturity level where you're trying to evade detection, that's what red teaming is for. So we kind of talk to our clients that we're going to be as noisy as possible. Now you can look for detection opportunities because we're going to be very loud, but we're not trying to avoid detection. But in terms of the CloudFox commands that are most effective, I would say the ones that have to do with workloads and then tying them, if the workloads have any roles that attach there, our administrator, or have a privest path to administrator. So like the instances, the Lambda, things like that, because that's how we often find our way to the privest paths.
So one of the things that's interesting about flaws.cloud and Scott's sort of running it over the years is he's been able to look at how people have been successful, what they've learned, the walkthroughs they've done. Since you're running sort of a hosted leaderboard, how do you intend to monitor and observe what people are doing with this tool?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure. The platform, right? It's an open source project, so I get the platform, I get all that stuff for free. You can actually do all of CloudFoxable without even signing up. The only thing you don't get is hints. So it'll be interesting to see how many people sign up. What challenges they like the best. So yeah, we don't really have any specific plans, but I am curious to see if there are challenges that are much more common than others.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.